The great spiral arms of the galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years. In the shining halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from 12 different species gathered each cycle to discuss trade routes, territorial disputes, and cultural exchanges. War was a word they spoke only in hushed tones, referring to the dark times before civilization had evolved beyond such primitive behaviors. The Zephyrians ruled the council with their superior minds. These tall, thin beings could speak without words, sharing thoughts directly from one mind to another. Their silver ships moved through space like liquid mercury, responding to their pilots' mental commands faster than any physical controls could manage. They considered themselves the teachers of the galaxy, guiding younger species toward enlightenment. The Luminari were beings of pure energy, crackling fields of light that took vaguely humanoid shapes when they needed to interact with solid matter. They had transcended the need for physical bodies millions of years ago. Their vessels were geometric patterns of controlled lightning that could travel at near light speed. They saw themselves as philosophers, contemplating the deeper mysteries of existence. The collective spoke as one voice through billions of bodies. Each individual was no smarter than a simple insect, but together they formed a mind of incredible complexity. Their cube-shaped ships moved in perfect formation, every action coordinated across vast distances. They were the builders of the galaxy, constructing massive space stations and terraforming dead worlds. These three species formed the Apex Council, the true rulers of civilized space. Below them, dozens of younger races were slowly guided toward the same evolutionary heights. The hegemony of civilized worlds maintained order through economic pressure and diplomatic solutions. When conflicts arose, they were settled through careful negotiation or, at worst, limited police actions with minimal casualties. The galaxy had forgotten what real war looked like. Then, 50 years ago, they discovered Earth. The human homeworld was a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in the outer rim territories. The species that lived there was bipedal, carbon-based, and surprisingly aggressive for such a young civilization. They had barely achieved fusion power and were still confined to their single solar system. The Zephyrians found them fascinating in the way a scientist might find an interesting insect. These creatures thought with individual minds, each one isolated and alone. They felt emotions with an intensity that bordered on madness. They formed social bonds based on abstract concepts like loyalty and love, rather than logical efficiency. Most amusing of all, they still practiced war. The humans had divided their own planet into competing territories and regularly fought over resources, ideologies, and territorial boundaries. Their military technology was crude but creative. They built weapons designed for one purpose: killing their own species. The Apex Council watched their surveillance feeds with a mixture of horror and anthropological curiosity. They actually used kinetic projectiles, Zephyrian Ambassador Keth Prime had noted during one council session. Metal slugs fired at high velocity. How beautifully primitive. Their aggression patterns suggest they have not yet learned to suppress their territorial instincts, added Luminary observer Brightstorm. Give them a few centuries of guidance and they might evolve beyond such behaviors. The collective finds their individual thought patterns chaotic and inefficient, spoke the drone representing the hive mind. But their problem-solving creativity shows potential for useful integration. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would be granted protectorate status under Zephyrian oversight. They would be slowly introduced to galactic civilization, taught to suppress their violent tendencies, and eventually allowed to join the community of civilized worlds. The process had worked successfully with 17 other species over the year. Past millennium. Contact was made through carefully orchestrated first encounters. Human governments were shown the vast scope of galactic civilization and given a simple choice: accept guidance toward enlightenment, or remain isolated on their single world until they matured sufficiently. Faced with technologies beyond their comprehension and the promise of the stars, humanity accepted. The restrictions were reasonable and temporary, the Zephyrians explained. Humans could not develop weapons beyond basic defensive systems. They could not establish colonies without permission. They could not build military vessels capable of interstellar travel. These limitations would be lifted gradually as they proved their commitment to peaceful evolution. In return, humans would be allowed to participate in galactic trade. They could establish cultural exchange programs. They could travel as individuals throughout civilized space, though always under the watchful guidance of their Zephyrian mentors. Most humans accepted these terms with grateful enthusiasm. They built trading posts, established embassies, and sent their brightest minds to study in the great universities of the core worlds. Human art, music, and literature became popular throughout the galaxy. Their emotional intensity, properly channeled, created works of surprising beauty. But not all humans were content with their assigned role. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars wheel slowly past the forward viewports. Officially, her ship was a cultural exchange vessel, carrying human artists and diplomats to various worlds throughout the galaxy. The vessel was small by galactic standards, barely 200 meters long, with basic fusion engines and minimal defensive systems. Officially, the truth was considerably different. Hidden within the ship's hull were weapon systems that would have impressed even the Apex Council, if they had known to look for them. The Defiance had been built in secret facilities beyond Pluto's orbit, using technologies carefully reverse-engineered from 50 years of cultural exchange. Elena's crew was officially composed of cultural attachés and trade specialists. In reality, they were some of Earth's most experienced military officers, each one trained in tactics the galaxy had forgotten existed. They had studied every conflict, every weapon system, every strategic doctrine they had been allowed to observe. And they had been allowed to observe a great deal. The galaxy's condescending attitude toward humanity had proven to be their greatest advantage. The Zephyrians saw humans as amusing primitives who needed constant supervision. They never considered that these primitives might be learning from every interaction, cataloging every weakness, mapping every strategic asset they encountered. Human traders had visited hundreds of military installations across the galaxy. Human artists had performed at naval bases and command centers. Human diplomats had attended strategy briefings, always as observers, never as participants. The galaxy thought it was civilizing humanity. In truth, humanity was studying its future enemies. Elena received a priority transmission from Earth, Command, encrypted in a code that used human literary references no alien could hope to understand. The message was brief but significant. The Outer Rim monitoring stations had detected something approaching from the void between galaxies. Something big. Something hostile. She activated her ship's communication array and sent acknowledgement back to Earth. Then she opened a channel to her crew. All hands, this is the captain. Set course for the Kepler sector. We're about to find out if 50 years of preparation was enough. The Defiance altered course, its engines humming with power that exceeded anything the Galactic Council believed humans possessed. Behind them, the lights of civilized space continued their eternal dance, unaware that the galaxy was about to face a test it had forgotten how to pass. Elena smiled grimly as she watched the stars ahead. The Apex Council had spent 3 millennia learning to be civilized. Humanity had spent 50 years learning to be ready. The time for hiding was almost over. The first signs appeared on the edge of detection range 6 months before anyone understood what they meant. Deep space monitoring stations in the Outer Rim territories began picking up strange readings from the void between galaxies. Energy. Signatures that didn't match any known technology. Movement patterns too organized to be natural phenomena. Zephyrian analysts dismissed the readings as equipment malfunctions. The Luminari suggested they might be previously unknown stellar formations. The collective filed the data under minor anomalies requiring future investigation. None of them recognized the signs of an approaching invasion fleet. The colony world of Hesperides was the first to die. Its population of 12 million Zephyrians had built a paradise of crystal spires and floating gardens. Their thought networks hummed with poetry and philosophy, their minds linked in harmonious contemplation of beauty and truth. The attack came without warning. Massive geometric ships emerged from hyperspace at the system's edge, their hulls a dull metallic gray that seemed to absorb light. They moved with purpose, ignoring all attempts at communication. Governor Telvash tried everything the hegemony had taught him about dealing with hostile contacts. He broadcast messages of peaceful intent. He offered territorial concessions and trade agreements. He even transmitted the complete works of Zephyrian philosophy, hoping to show these newcomers the value of civilized discourse. The gray ships responded by consuming his planet. They deployed machines that broke matter down at the molecular level, feeding the raw materials into massive processing centers. Within 72 hours, Hesperides was gone, not destroyed, simply converted into something else. The gray ships grew larger, their hulls expanding to incorporate the mass they had harvested. The few escape ships that managed to flee brought news that shook the Galactic Council to its foundations. The Devourer swarm had arrived. Emergency sessions were called. The Apex Council convened for the first time in decades to address what they termed a significant diplomatic challenge. They reviewed the attack recordings, analyzed the enemy technology, and consulted their vast databases of historical conflicts. They appear to be a collective intelligence focused on resource acquisition, Keth Prime reported to the Assembly. Their technology suggests a purely utilitarian mindset, lacking the refinement of true civilization. Their energy consumption patterns indicate they treat living worlds as raw materials, added Brightstorm. This behavior suggests they have not evolved beyond basic survival instincts. The collective calculates a 73.6% probability that standard diplomatic protocols will achieve acceptable resolution, droned the hive mind representative. The Council's response followed procedures that had maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years. First, they attempted to establish communication through mathematical concepts and universal constants. When that failed, they offered the Devourers uninhabited systems rich in the resources they seemed to crave. The Devourers consumed those systems and moved deeper into civilized space. The Council then authorized their first military response in over a millennium. A combined fleet of 200 vessels was assembled from across the hegemony. Zephyrian mine ships would confuse and disorient the enemy command structure. Luminary energy forms would overload their power systems. Collectively, drones would overwhelm them through superior numbers. The Battle of the Proxima Reach lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Devourer ships adapted to every weapon used against them. Zephyrian mental attacks passed harmlessly through minds that operated on completely different principles. Luminary energy beams were absorbed and redirected back at their sources. Collective drone swarms were systematically eliminated by weapons that learned and countered their coordination algorithms. Worse than the defeat was what happened next. The Devourer ships began incorporating the wreckage of the Allied fleet. Their hulls shifted and changed, integrating captured technology. Within hours, they had grown stronger and more capable than before. They learned from every encounter, Admiral Keth Prime reported in his final transmission before his flagship was consumed. Each battle makes them more dangerous. This is not warfare as we understand it. This is evolution through consumption. Panic began to spread through the civilized worlds as news of the defeat reached the core systems. Species that had known only peace for centuries suddenly faced a threat they had no framework to comprehend. Their weapons were insufficient. Their tactics were obsolete. Their entire philosophy of conflict resolution was useless against an enemy that neither negotiated nor retreated. The Devourers pressed their advantage. World after world fell to their advance. The crystal cities of the Zephyrians were reduced to raw silicon. The energy gardens of the Luminari were drained and converted to power. The vast orbital constructs of the collective were dismantled and absorbed. In desperation, the Apex Council authorized the deployment of their ultimate weapon, the Starkiller Array. 3 artificial stars were detonated in the Devourer's path, creating a barrier of radiation and gravitational distortion that should have stopped any known technology. The Devourers paused for exactly 6 hours while their ships adapted to the new conditions. Then they consumed the artificial stars and continued their advance, now armed with stellar-level energy weapons. Ambassador Chen Wei watched the emergency broadcast from his office in the human embassy on Centrax Prime. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Representatives who had spent their entire lives managing peaceful negotiations now faced a threat they could not understand or counter. Chen had requested a private audience with the Apex Council 3 times in the past month. Each time he had been politely informed that the current situation requires the attention of species with relevant military experience. The subtext was clear. Primitive humans had nothing to contribute to solving this crisis. He tried again, sending an urgent message directly to Keth Prime's office. The reply came within minutes. Ambassador Chen, we appreciate humanity's concern during these difficult times. Perhaps your species could assist with refugee logistics while the Apex species address the military aspects of this situation. We have reviewed your weapons demonstrations and determined that your fusion-level technology would not be effective against the Devourer threat. Chen read the message twice, then activated a secure communication channel to Earth Command. His words were simple but carried the weight of humanity's 50-year preparation. They still think we're primitives. Authorization requested to reveal actual capabilities. The reply came back immediately. Authorization granted. Show them what we've really been building. Across human space, hidden shipyards powered up their construction arrays. Weapons systems that had been tested in the dark between stars were loaded aboard vessels that officially didn't exist. Military personnel who had spent decades posing as traders and artists reported to their real commanders. The UES Defiance received new orders as it traveled toward the battle zone. Captain Elena Vasquez read them carefully, then smiled. 50. Years of being underestimated were about to pay dividends. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had not spent those 5 decades learning to be civilized. They had spent them learning to be ready for exactly this moment. The Devourers were coming. The apex species had failed to stop them, and now it was time for the primitive humans to show the galaxy what real warfare looked like. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, in chambers carved from solid rock and shielded from every form of detection the galaxy possessed, Admiral Sarah Chen walked through humanity's greatest secret. The hidden fleet construction facility stretched for kilometers in every direction, its automated factories working around the clock to produce weapons the Galactic Council couldn't imagine. Status report, she commanded as she entered the main command center. 1,700 combat vessels. At full readiness, reported her chief of operations. Another 400 in final assembly. All crews trained and equipped. Hidden supply depots operational in 47 systems. Sarah nodded, watching the massive holographic display that showed humanity's real military strength. For 50 years, while the galaxy treated them as amusing primitives, humans had been building the most advanced war machine in known space. The deception had begun on the day of first contact. When the Zephyrians arrived with their superior technology and condescending attitudes, humanity's leaders had made a choice that would define the next half-century. They would play the role of grateful primitives while secretly learning everything they could about their benefactors. Every human who left Earth became a spy. The artists who performed at alien military bases memorized defensive layouts. The traders who visited shipyards cataloged weapon systems. The diplomats who attended strategy meetings recorded every tactical doctrine they observed. But humanity's greatest advantage wasn't intelligence gathering, it was innovation. While alien species followed rigid technological development paths that had remained unchanged for millennia, human engineers approached every problem with fresh eyes and creative solutions. The Zephyrians had mastered thought-controlled technology, but they had never considered what would happen if that mental link was disrupted by focused electromagnetic fields. The Luminari had transcended physical matter, but they remained vulnerable to quantum resonance weapons that could destabilize their energy matrices. The collective operated through perfect coordination, but humans had developed viral algorithms that could turn that coordination against them. Most importantly, humanity had weaponized concepts the civilized galaxy considered obsolete. While aliens sought elegant solutions that minimized casualties and preserved infrastructure, humans designed weapons with one purpose: complete destruction of the enemy's ability to fight. Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the Defiance's hidden armory, reviewing weapon systems that officially didn't exist, gravitational mines that could turn an enemy's mass against them, creating localized black holes that consumed entire ship formations, quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, bypassing shields and armor by attacking from directions that shouldn't be possible, kinetic barriers that converted incoming energy attacks into raw acceleration, using enemy fire to power defensive systems. The galaxy forgot that war is not about honor or minimizing casualties, she told her weapons officer. It's about making the enemy unable or unwilling to continue fighting. But humanity's most devastating weapon wasn't technological. It was psychological. The apex species had evolved beyond what they considered primitive emotions. They no longer felt rage, hatred, or the desperate determination that comes from facing extinction. These feelings were seen as obstacles to rational thought. Humans had refined those emotions into tactical advantages. Where aliens saw controlled aggression, humans saw hesitation. Where they saw calculated precision, humans saw predictability. Where they saw civilized restraint, humans saw weakness. Lieutenant Commander James Park watched the tactical displays as Devourer forces advanced deeper into civilized space. The enemy was adapting to every weapon the galaxy threw at them, growing stronger with each victory. But they were also revealing their patterns, their preferences, their limitations. They're hive-minded but not perfectly synchronized, he reported to the strategy team. There's a lag between detection and adaptation, maybe 3 to 4 seconds. They prefer to absorb technology rather than destroy it outright, and they've never faced an opponent that deliberately uses unpredictable tactics. The Devourers had evolved to consume and adapt. They were perfect opponents for the orderly, predictable warfare the galaxy had practiced for millennia. But they had never encountered human warfare, chaotic, creative, and deliberately designed to be impossible to adapt to. On Earth, President Martinez addressed the hidden cabinet that had overseen humanity's secret preparations for 5 decades. The galaxy is about to learn what we've really been doing out here. 50 years of careful planning, of being underestimated, of letting them think we were harmless. Are we ready? Project Prometheus has exceeded all expectations, reported the Secretary of Advanced Warfare. Our technology is 50 to 100 years ahead of anything in the galaxy. Our military doctrine is completely outside their understanding of conflict. Most importantly, our personnel are trained for actual war, not the police actions the hegemony calls military operations. The president smiled grimly. Then let's show them why evolution doesn't always mean giving up your fangs. Across human space, sleeper agents activated. The cheerful human traders who had visited military installations for decades suddenly revealed themselves as intelligence operatives with detailed knowledge of every defense system in the galaxy. The artists, who had entertained alien officers, emerged as sabotage specialists who could disable entire fleets from within. The diplomats who had observed strategy sessions began transmitting real-time tactical intelligence to human command centers. But the greatest revelation was yet to come. The galaxy believed humans possessed only basic fusion technology and simple, kinetic weapons. They had no idea that human scientists had reverse-engineered and improved upon every alien technology they had encountered. The Defiance's true specifications were staggering. Its fusion reactors were based on luminary energy conversion principles, but powered by controlled antimatter reactions that produced 10 times more energy. Its hull incorporated collective adaptive materials, but with human innovations that could shift between different configurations in milliseconds. Its navigation systems used Zephyrian thought interface technology, but enhanced with quantum computing arrays that could process millions of tactical scenarios simultaneously. Most shocking of all was its armament. While aliens built weapons designed to disable and capture, humans built weapons designed to kill. The Defiance carried enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems, all of it concealed within a hull that appeared barely capable of defending itself. Captain Vasquez received her final briefing from Earth Command as her ship approached the war zone. The message was encrypted using human literature references that no alien translator could hope to understand. The galaxy has spent 3,000 years learning to be civilized, the message read. They've forgotten that sometimes, civilization needs to be defended by those willing to be uncivilized. You are authorized to reveal humanity's true capabilities. Show them what we learned while they thought we were learning to be peaceful. Elena looked at her crew, officers who had spent decades pretending to be cultural attachés and trade specialists while secretly training for the war they all knew was coming. They had watched the galaxy's military forces fail against the Devourers. They had studied every tactical mistake, every strategic error, every sign of weakness. Now it was time to teach the galaxy that there was a difference between being evolved and being prepared. Set course for Kepler 442b, she commanded. Full stealth until we reach the battle zone. When we arrive, power up all systems and broadcast on all frequencies. It's time the galaxy met the real human military. The Defiance altered course, its engines humming with power that exceeded anything the Galactic Council believed possible. Behind them, the lights of human space flickered as hidden shipyards launched vessels that didn't appear on any official registry. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest deception wasn't pretending to be primitive. It was letting everyone believe they were being honest about it. The battle for Kepler 442b was already lost when the last defenders took their positions around the battered world. What remained of the galaxy's combined fleets hung in desperate formation above the planet's atmosphere, their formations broken, and their morale shattered. Admiral Keth Prime's flagship, the Wisdom's Edge, drifted among the wreckage of 3 Zephyrian battle groups. Half his crew was dead, their minds burned out by failed attempts to telepathically contact the Devourer hive mind. The elegant silver hull of his vessel was scarred by weapons that had adapted to every defense they possessed. Status report, he commanded, though he already knew the answer would bring no comfort. 17 ships operational out of our original 43, his tactical officer replied, his mental voice heavy with exhaustion. The Luminari have been reduced to scattered energy fragments. The collective has lost coordination. Their hive nodes are being systematically targeted. Through the viewports of his bridge, Keith Prime could see the Devourer fleet approaching for what would certainly be their final assault. The gray vessels had grown larger with each victory, their hulls now incorporating technology from dozens of defeated civilizations. They moved with the patience of inevitable death, knowing their enemies had no weapons left to threaten them. Send a final transmission to all civilized worlds, the Admiral commanded. Tell them we held the line as long as we could. Tell them the hegemony dies with honor, even if it dies today. The transmission went out across subspace, carrying the last words of galactic civilization to every inhabited system. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had known only peace for millennia listened as their defenders accepted defeat. But the transmission had another effect, one that none of the assembled fleets expected. Hidden monitoring stations throughout the galaxy suddenly activated, their receivers tuned to frequencies that had been silent for 50 years. Emergency protocols that had never been used came online. And in the dark spaces between stars, ships that didn't appear on any registry began moving toward Kepler 442b. The Devourer Vanguard was only minutes from weapon range when something impossible happened. The long-range sensors detected a new, hyperspace signature approaching from the outer system. A single contact, small by galactic standards, moving at velocities that shouldn't have been possible for such a compact vessel. Unknown contact bearing 027 Mark 15, reported the sensor operator aboard Keth Prime's ship. Configuration unknown, energy signature. Admiral, I can't identify the power source. It's not fusion, not antimatter, not even Luminari energy conversion technology. Zephyrian vessels, identify yourselves, came a voice over the communications array. The accent was strange, the grammar slightly formal, but the meaning was clear. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the UES Defiance. Request tactical situation. Update. Keth Prime stared at the communications panel in confusion. UES meant United Earthship, one of the primitive human vessels. But humans weren't allowed military ships capable of interstellar travel, and no human technology should have been able to reach this system so quickly. Human vessel, he replied. You are ordered to withdraw immediately. This is a restricted, military zone. Your defensive capabilities are insufficient for this engagement. Admiral, with respect, we didn't come here to hide behind your defensive capabilities. Elena's voice carried a tone that made Keth Prime's telepathic senses recoil. There was something in that human voice, a coldness, a certainty, that he had never heard before. We came here to end this. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the battle zone, and every sensor array in the combined fleet focused on the newcomer. What they saw made no sense according to everything they knew about human technology. The ship was smaller than most cruisers, perhaps 200 meters in length, but its hull wasn't the crude metal construction they expected from human engineering. Instead, it rippled and shifted like liquid mercury, incorporating what appeared to be adaptive materials that shouldn't have existed in human space. Energy readings spiked beyond anything their instruments could measure accurately. Admiral? His sensor operator's mental voice carried notes of disbelief. That ship is generating more power than our entire battle group combined. The hull composition includes materials I can't identify. And the weapon signatures. The officer paused, his thoughts too shocked to form coherent words. Before Keth Prime could demand an explanation, every communications array in the fleet activated simultaneously. A broad-spectrum transmission flooded every frequency, cutting through Devourer jamming as if it weren't there. Devourer fleet, Elena's voice rang across the battlefield. This is humanity. We are no longer asking permission. For 30 seconds, absolute silence filled space around Kepler 442b. The Devourer advance paused as their hive mind processed this unexpected development. The surviving galactic forces held their breath, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Throughout civilized space, beings who had given up hope listened to their communication arrays in stunned amazement. On 10,000 worlds, in refugee camps and emergency shelters, the same question was whispered in a dozen different languages. Who are the humans? The Devourers responded first. Their formation shifted as targeting systems locked onto the single human ship. Energy. Weapons that had consumed entire battle groups focused their combined power on what appeared to be an insignificant target. The attack never reached its destination. The Defiance moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Not the graceful sweeps of Zephyrian mine ships or the geometric patterns of collective formations, but with the deadly precision of a predator that had evolved for one purpose: killing its enemies. Gravitational distortions erupted around the ship as it activated weapon systems that violated the known laws of physics. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as the Defiance's gravity mines detonated throughout the Devourer formation. Ships that had survived every weapon the galaxy possessed found themselves torn apart by their own mass as localized black holes opened within their hulls. Impossible, whispered Keth Prime as his instruments registered energy signatures that belonged in the cores of stars. Where did they get this technology? His answer came as the Defiance opened fire with its main armament. Quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously bypassed Devourer shields by attacking from angles that didn't exist in normal space. Kinetic impactors accelerated to significant fractions of light speed turned enemy armor into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. But most shocking of all was the tactical doctrine the humans employed. Where galactic forces tried to disable and capture, humans simply destroyed. Where aliens sought to minimize casualties and preserve infrastructure, humans focused on making the enemy completely unable to continue fighting. They're not trying to defeat the Devourers, realized Brightstorm, the luminary observer whose energy form flickered with amazement. They're trying to exterminate them. The human ship moved through the Devourer formation like a force of nature, its weapon system cycling through attack patterns that changed faster than the enemy could adapt. Each time the Devourers began to adjust to one type of weapon, the Defiance switched to something completely different. Plasma cannons gave way to particle beams. Particle beams were replaced by exotic matter projectiles. Exotic matter projectiles transformed into weapons that seemed to attack the fundamental forces holding matter together. Admiral, his tactical officer's mental voice carried pure amazement. The human ship isn't following any known combat doctrine. Their attack patterns are completely chaotic but somehow perfectly coordinated. It's as if they're deliberately making themselves impossible to predict. Keth Prime watched as the Devourer fleet, the same force that had consumed 17 core worlds, began to break apart under the human assault. Ships that had grown stronger with every victory now found themselves facing an opponent that refused to follow the rules of engagement they understood. "They're using our psychology against us," transmitted one of the surviving collective drones. "The Devourers adapt by analyzing patterns, but these humans have no patterns. They are organized chaos." The battle lasted exactly 14 minutes. When it ended, the Devourer vanguard was gone, not defeated or driven off, but completely eliminated. The space around Kepler 442b was filled with expanding clouds of debris that had once been an unstoppable invasion force. The Defiance hung motionless in the aftermath, its weapons powered down, but its presence filling the sensor arrays of every surviving ship. For the first time in 50 years, the galaxy saw humanity as it truly was. Not grateful primitives learning to be civilized, but apex predators who had been waiting for the right moment to reveal their fangs. "Admiral," came Elena's voice over the communications array, "request permission to coordinate with surviving fleet elements. We have 400 additional vessels en route, and intelligence suggests the main Devourer force will arrive within 6 hours. Keth Prime stared at his instruments, trying to process what he had just witnessed. 400 more ships like this one? Main force? How long had humanity been planning for this moment? "Captain Vasquez," he replied, his mental voice carrying the weight of a civilization's shattered assumptions. "Permission granted, but I must ask." The arrival of the human fleet 6 hours later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. 400 ships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls bearing the scars of battles the Galactic Council had never known were fought. They ranged from sleek destroyers barely 50 meters long to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the galaxy's archives. Admiral Keth Prime studied the formation through his ship's enhanced sensors, his telepathic abilities reeling from the shock of discovery. Where did they build all of this? Our monitoring stations would have detected construction on this scale. "Admiral," his intelligence officer's mental voice carried tones of disbelief. "Preliminary analysis suggests these vessels incorporate technology from every major species in the galaxy. But the combinations are impossible. They've somehow merged Zephyrian thought interface systems with collective adaptive materials and luminary energy conversion technology. That shouldn't be possible. The fundamental principles are incompatible. Unless someone spent decades studying each system individually and found ways to make them work together." The implications hit Keth Prime like a physical blow. For 50 years, humans had been present at every military installation, every strategic briefing, every technological demonstration. They had been cataloging capabilities, studying weaknesses, and learning how to combine alien technologies in ways their creators had never imagined. Captain Elena Vasquez's voice cut across the fleet communications array. "All vessels, this is Admiral Vasquez assuming overall tactical command. Devourer main force ETA 4 hours. Begin deployment of siegebreaker formations." "Admiral?" Keth Prime realized he was witnessing the emergence of a military hierarchy that had existed in secret for decades. These weren't civilian ships pressed into emergency service. They were purpose-built war machines commanded by officers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. The human fleet moved with the precision of long practice, their formations flowing around the battered remnants of the galactic forces like water around stones, but there was nothing fluid about their intentions. Weapons systems powered up that registered on sensors as barely contained stellar fusion. Defensive shields activated that bent space-time itself. "They're not just more advanced than we thought," whispered Brightstorm, the luminary observer. "They're more advanced than we are." The Devourer main force arrived exactly on schedule, their massive vessels emerging from dark space with the confidence of inevitable victory. The hive mind had learned of their vanguard's destruction, but adaptation was their strength. They had faced setbacks before and always overcome them through superior numbers and technological absorption. What they found waiting for them challenged every assumption they had made about galactic civilization. Elena stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Nemesis, watching as enemy formations took shape on her tactical displays. The Devourer fleet was enormous, over 2,000 vessels, each one grown larger through the consumption of fallen worlds. But size wasn't everything in modern warfare. All ships, this is Admiral Vasquez. The enemy believes they can adapt to any threat because they've never faced unpredictability as a weapon system. Today we teach them the difference between adaptation and improvisation. Execute Pattern Omega. Pattern Omega wasn't a formation or a tactical doctrine, it was controlled chaos. Every human ship began operating independently, their attack patterns seemingly random, but coordinated through quantum-encrypted communication networks that changed frequencies every microsecond. No two ships used the same weapons or approached from the same angle. The entire fleet became a swarm of unpredictable violence that refused to follow any logic the Devourers could analyze. The Devourer response was exactly what human strategists had predicted. Their hive mind tried to identify patterns in the attack, looking for the underlying structure they could adapt to counter. But there was no structure, only creative destruction directed by individual human minds that gloried in their ability to think outside every box. Captain Sarah Kim piloted her destroyer through the Devourer formation like a dancer performing a deadly ballet. Her ship's weapons cycled through 17 different exotic energy types in the space of 3 minutes, each attack completely different from the last. When the enemy began to adapt to plasma cannons, she switched to gravitational distortions. When they adjusted to kinetic impactors, she deployed quantum resonance weapons that attacked the fundamental bonds holding matter together. "This is beautiful," she transmitted to her squadron. 50 years of pretending to be traders and diplomats, and now we get to show them what human creativity really looks like when it's focused on killing things. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human vessels demonstrated the terrifying effectiveness of weaponized unpredictability. The Devourers had adapted to every other species they encountered, because those species followed logical, predictable combat doctrines. But humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of organized chaos. The tide of battle turned within the first hour. Devourer ships that had never known defeat found themselves unable to adapt quickly enough to counter attacks that changed faster than their collective mind could process. For the first time in their species' existence, they began to retreat, but Elena had studied their psychology too thoroughly to allow escape. All ships implement containment protocols. Nothing leaves this system. The human fleet deployed weapons that existed purely to deny the enemy the luxury of retreat. Hyperspace inhibitors created fields of distorted space-time that prevented faster-than-light travel. Gravity mines formed an expanding web of death that turned the system's outer reaches into a killing field. The Devourers found themselves trapped in a box with predators who had evolved specifically to destroy them. The slaughter that followed lasted 8 hours. By the time it ended, the Devourer main force had been reduced to expanding clouds of constituent atoms. Their hive mind, faced with the complete inability to adapt to human tactics, broadcast a message that shocked every surviving witness. This species understands war as art, death as tool, victory as necessity. We cannot adapt to organized chaos. We submit to apex predator. The surrender of the Devourer swarm sent shockwaves throughout galactic civilization. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had believed that all species would eventually evolve beyond warfare into more civilized forms of conflict resolution. The idea that a species could deliberately cultivate and refine their capacity for violence was alien to everything they understood about evolutionary development. Ambassador Chen Wei stood before the reconvened Galactic Council, no longer as a supplicant seeking permission, but as humanity's representative in negotiations between equals. The chamber that had once dismissed his people as amusing primitives now listened in stunned silence as he outlined humanity's territorial requirements and military objectives. Humanity claims no desire to rule the galaxy, he stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a species that had just demonstrated its ability to destroy any opposition. We seek only to ensure that the word protectorate is never again applied to any sentient species without their explicit consent. The formation of the Terran Defense Coalition marked the end of the old galactic order. Humanity didn't conquer the civilized worlds. They simply made it clear that the previous hierarchy was now obsolete. Species that had evolved beyond their warrior instincts suddenly found themselves dependent on a species that had refined those instincts into an art form. But the humans proved to be surprisingly reasonable conquerors. They established mutual defense pacts rather than occupation zones. They shared their advanced military technology with species that demonstrated genuine commitment to defending themselves. Most importantly, they made it clear that their protection came without the condescending guidance that had characterized the old hegemony. Elena stood on the observation deck of the Nemesis as it orbited Earth, watching supply convoys carry humanitarian aid to worlds devastated by the Devourer swarm. The irony wasn't lost on her. The species the galaxy had considered too primitive for military technology was now rebuilding civilization with weapons, turned to peaceful purposes. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Collective. Admiral Keth Prime requests permission to establish formal military cooperation protocols." Elena smiled. "Tell the Admiral that humanity would be honored to share our tactical doctrines with any species willing to learn that peace is best preserved by those prepared for war." The message that went out to every corner of civilized space was simple, but profound. The galaxy had a new apex predator, and it was benevolent only as long as its protection was appreciated. The old order of condescending guidance had ended. The new order of mutual respect had begun. In the historical archives that would be written about these events, scholars would note that humanity's greatest victory wasn't the defeat of the Devourer swarm. It was the 50-year deception that allowed them to study, learn, and prepare, while the galaxy dismissed them as harmless primitives. The galaxy had spent 3,000 years learning to be civilized. Humanity had spent 50 years learning to be ready. When the test came,